The National Telethon is live again. Ruslan Sheripov here. I'm Marichka Pedalka. And joining us now is Ihor Chalenko, head of the Center for Analysis and Strategy. With him, we will discuss the latest statements regarding Ukraine and the most recent international events that directly relate to the ongoing war here. Mr. Ihor, thank you for joining us. We've already had a brief chat behind the scenes. From the way our conversation went before we appeared in front of the audience, it's clear that a very important issue, in our Ukrainian context, of course, is the upcoming meeting between Trump and Chinese President Xi. Tell me, please, what could this meeting determine at this particular time, considering the current political positions of Russia and Ukraine?
Well, first of all, we all perfectly understand that the economic keys to ending Russia's war against Ukraine are currently not in the hands of the United States, which is imposing sanctions, nor in the hands of the European Union, but specifically in the hands of China. And accordingly, what is needed here is a change in Xi Jinping's position regarding whether or not to support Russia specifically. So, when Trump repeatedly publishes messages saying that he would like Xi to change his position and help bring about an end to the war, these are not just words.
Specifically, what does that mean? To stop buying Russian oil?
No, it's actually not even about the energy industry sector. Bon, it's more about partially financing the Russian economy right now. Chinese businesses are entering actively. Energy is just one part, because we remember that China is currently buying up to 2 million barrels a day from the Russian Federation. This is very significant. In fact, it's around 43% approximately. China is actually the #1 buyer of Russian oil, but we also understand we're talking about technology, about spare parts for drones and so on. For example, guided aerial bombs, which can now reach up to 200 kilometers, we've seen that they are powered by jet engines made in China. And there are many such details. And it's quite clear that Putin is looking to China whether he can continue the war or not. That's why a direct change in Xi's position is needed here. Not just some statements like peace everywhere, peace. No, the discussion should be about concrete actions and a clear signal to Putin that he needs to stop. So far, it's clear that Putin has received a different signal. We saw this in September when the parade and other events took place in China. So, of course, Putin believes that China's support will continue. But we've already seen that Trump and Xi can come to an agreement. For example, the TikTok case and the purchase of its American division for $13 billion. Despite all the noise surrounding the bilateral trade agreement, there are nevertheless concrete facts of agreements here. That is despite the fact that everyone, including Trump, are at the extremes of two poles. They are clearly still able to reach certain results. But unlike Trump, who wanted to see results from Putin, and we know that Putin does everything to drag out the process.
And here it's interesting, to speculate. What could Trump possibly offer Xi that would make Xi change his mind? Maybe it's not even about predictions, but rather about the issues that both sides argue about the most. As far as we know, Trump has imposed or is planning to impose tariffs on China. There's been so much talk about these tariffs that it's hard to even keep track. Are they being imposed on this or not, or on something else? In your opinion, will these kinds of measures actually work?
By the way, starting from November 1st, a new wave of tariffs on Chinese products was supposed to be introduced. That part is true, but in fact it was more of a feedback, a response to China's actions, as they are trying to monopolize, both in terms of information and licensing, the distribution of rare earth materials around the world. Even so, they already directly and indirectly control 90% of rare earths, and this directly affects the position of the United States. Nevertheless, aside from the economy itself, we understand that in the security sphere, Taiwan obviously remains a highly relevant topic. Whether China will attack or not. That is, for Trump, it's important that if this does happen, it should be at least sometime after January 2029. I'm also currently considering the possibility that Trump might try to sell the Venezuela issue to China. We know that a future US ground campaign in Venezuela has been announced, and this could really be traded as, let's say, an element of pressure from China directly on Putin.
Mr. Ihor, we've already seen the consequences of the sanctions against Russia imposed by Trump. Immediately, Putin's special envoy rushed to the United States with statements suggesting they were almost ready to stop the war at the front line. How do you assess all these statements by Dmitriev that came right after Trump's decision was announced?
I didn't actually see any real signal of a willingness to negotiate there, despite Dmitriev's statement that we're supposedly approaching a real opportunity for agreements. One simple reason. Notice, even Vance says, here's the Ukrainian side, emphasizing security guarantees. There is the Russian side, which focuses on the territorial issue. This is the position of the United States, to simplify the negotiation track as much as possible in order to at least reach a ceasefire. Dmitriev arrives, and what does he say? Now, it's not 2 issues, but 3. Also, Ukraine's neutrality, essentially as an element of security guarantees. For whom? For the Russian Federation. This is actually quite an interesting message when the aggressor demands security guarantees for itself. And it's clear that no one will agree to Ukraine's neutrality. This is absolutely a condition that cannot be fulfilled under the current circumstances. But nevertheless, this is what Dmitriev is doing. He gains access to pro-democratic, pro-republican media in the United States, gives interviews and tries even harder to push messages about the supposed kinship between the Russian Federation and the United States. That is, his main line was really propaganda, even more so than actually engaging in real negotiations. In my opinion, Scott Bessent, the US Secretary of the Treasury, put it as accurately and clearly as possible when he said, "You are listening to a propagandist."
So what's most interesting is that they actually let this propagandist on the air.
Well, exactly. Well, it's an opportunity. An opportunity to get through. After all, the United States, is a democratic country, and in principle they allow different viewpoints to be expressed. And it's also an opportunity today to understand where the fake is, where the lies are, and where the truth is. And as we can see, despite Russians having full access to the American information space, we still see that American public opinion today stands on the side of Ukraine regarding the continued support for our country. And this is true both among Republican supporters and among Democratic supporters. And obviously the White House also takes this into account, despite the fact that today Dmitry, for example, really does have the opportunity to voice Moscow's position.
By the way, he was once again pushing the narrative that Ukraine and Russia had almost reached an agreement in April 2022. Let me remind you, at that time, those were absolutely capitulatory terms for Ukraine. If Johnson hadn't come to Kyiv and said that we would fight, he was once again pushing this narrative.
I'll tell you more. This is classic for Russian diplomacy, or rather pseudo-diplomacy. They never refute previous statements. They simply layer new information on top of the old roots, onto that hollow, and in doing so, they supposedly prove the correctness of their position. But everyone understands that in the current situation, this makes no sense. And by the way, right now, for example, regarding the breakdown of Budapest, who do the Russians blame? They blame Ukraine and the Europeans, including the United Kingdom. Moreover, Budapest was supposed to be a bilateral meeting, specifically between Trump and Putin. What do Ukrainians and Europeans have to do with the disruption of that meeting? Obviously, there are 2 parties involved here, and it definitely wasn't Trump who disrupted it, but judging by the Russians' position, who don't want a compromise, at the very least, the meeting has been postponed. Whether it will take place in Budapest, Ankara, or elsewhere remains to be seen.
Polish Prime Minister Tusk gave a major interview. And yesterday, his quote from that interview spread widely here, where he allegedly said that Volodymyr Zelensky told him that Ukraine is ready to fight for another 2 or 3 years. As far as I can remember, this is the first time a leader of such political weight has revealed some insider information specifically on military matters from a conversation with the president of Ukraine. In your opinion, why did Tusk say this and why now?
For whom?
And for whom, yes. I wouldn't take such words literally. It's more an indicator of Ukraine's readiness for defense. In other words, we are not at the stage where we will accept, without some part of, say, Russia's ultimatum demands. That is, we will defend ourselves for as long as the aggression continues. So the logic is this: 2 or 3 years, or some other period. Well, we understand that right now, for example, the topic of a reparations loan is being discussed. What is this reparations loan for? It's to provide for both the civilian sector, accordingly the financing of the state budget and the co-financing of the armed forces of Ukraine for the coming years. This shows the Russians today that no matter how many times Putin asks Belousov, for example, about the duration of the so-called special military operation, there is really no point in continuing this aggression because Ukraine will keep defending itself.
In recent years, especially in the first years of the war, we considered Europe to be our weak spot, but it has become much more active, especially in 2024 and 2025. Tell me, please, has that Rubicon already been crossed when Europe moved from words to action?
We are still in the process of this, unfortunately, because at the very least, if we talk even at the EU level, there are only initiatives so far. For example, Ursula von der Leyen. Remember, at first there was talk of 800 billion euros. Right now, only the SAFE initiative has actually been adopted. That's 150 billion euros, which is distributed among various countries, specifically for the European defense industry. Plus, a portion of the funds goes to Ukraine. Still, the process is ongoing. For example, the European Commissioner for Defense and Space, Mr. Kubilius, is doing a lot of work. So there is an understanding that action needs to be taken. The pace of this action is insufficient. As of today, it is hindered by...
But what exactly needs to be done?
Well, it's everything. Optimizing bureaucracy as such, making decisions, and realizing the level of threat that exists. That it's not just Putin trying to raise the stakes, say, within the context of the Russian-Ukrainian war, but we're really talking about the possibility of expanding aggression directly against NATO and EU member states. And in addition, there's the issue of understanding the balance between which areas will be funded by the European budget and which by national budgets, because a number of countries are still prioritizing social support, welfare, and certain economic projects without really focusing on the issue of defense. And this is the biggest problem right now, because as we can see, there's also Trump's position, for example, who says Europeans spend, say, 5% of your GDP. Well, in principle, such a decision has been made that they will spend more. But again, when it comes to deadlines, that's by 2035 plus 3.5% plus 1.5% for other countries, including Ukraine. Yes, if we look at the eastern flank of NATO, those are the figures we see now. But if we talk, say, about Spain, Spain says we don't need to spend that much. That's the problem, because there is no consolidation within the European Union, no real understanding that it's necessary to switch to a mode, if not of war, then certainly not a mode of peace right now.
And what exactly did you see in this massive drone strike on Moscow last night? In your opinion, was it more of a military or a political action?
I think it was a combined strike. It has both an informational impact and a military one, because we are still trying to achieve the necessary result. Well, after all, the Russians have repeatedly struck the Ukrainian capital, and obviously there have to be retaliatory strikes. But at the same time, we are also showing that the Russian Federation today is not completely protected, and Putin is not protected either. And when even their mobile fire groups are forced to be stationed right next to the Kremlin, it shows that their multi-layered air defense system is, well, not all that reliable. If today we're talking about, say, 40 drones launched at Moscow, then by scaling up these launches, and let me point out, we're already launching 200 or more drones. That is, we could direct these drones straight at a single Russian capital, and that would be a very serious blow. And the Russians will understand that the war has come, and this is a direct consequence of Putin's policies.
And the last question, very briefly. In your opinion, is the potential summit in Budapest already a thing of the past, something that won't happen? Or is it still a possibility?
I wouldn't completely write it off as something from the past. This topic could still play a role for one simple reason. Trump still wants to help Viktor Orban win the next parliamentary elections, so this issue could still come up. But I'm still betting more on Turkey, because it will be easier for Putin to get there.
Thank you, Mr. Ihor. Ihor Rachelenko, head of the Center for Analysis and Strategy, was our guest. Up next is the television news service and Solomia Vitvitska.